Becky, who is a PhD student working on physical activity with us, as well as Jake, who's an undergrad. Becky's favorite snack is
cheese and crackers, and Jake's is similar to that, but hummus and crackers.
So when you're ready, you two.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to start off by talking about how much the Guelph Family Health Study children should be moving. So these are the current guidelines from the Canadian Society for Exercise and Physiology. And there are other guidelines about what a full 24 hours should look like for your child, but I'm mostly going to focus on the physical activity guidelines today. So for children who are toddlers between the ages of 1 to 2 years old, the recommendations are for 3 hours of any type of physical activity per day, including some energetic play. Now, when I say energetic play, I mean higher intensity activity, things like running and jumping, basically anything that will get your child out of breath. For children ages 3 to 4 years old, the recommendation is 3 hours of physical activity per day with at least 1 hour of energetic or that higher intensity physical activity. And then for children aged 5 to 17 years old, the recommendation is 1 hour of moderate to vigorous activity per day, at least 3 times a week, and several hours of light physical activity per day. So in the Guelph Family Health Study, we measure physical activity using devices called accelerometers, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. And hopefully this sheet looks familiar to you. We do ask you parents to fill out these sheets to let us know when children are sleeping, when they are napping, and when the device is removed. This gives us a ton of information about the different types of activity that the children are spending their time in during the day. And although I cannot imagine how hard it must be to get children to wear these devices, some of your comments did leave us with a pretty good idea. So from the pool parties and swimming lessons to the diaper explosions and temper tantrums, and the removal times caused by daycare staff, babysitters, or in-laws, we wanted to thank you so much for providing this information. It was invaluable for our data processing, and it also served as pretty good entertainment for the last few months. So from the entire movement analysis group, thank you so much. So this is some data from our baseline analysis, so all pre-COVID times. And I'm going to present some data on 3 different types of movement behaviors. So the first is sedentary behavior, which includes activities such as sitting, lying down, or maybe watching a movie. The second is light physical activity, which includes activities like walking or playing with toys. And the last is moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is that high intensity energetic play I mentioned earlier. So again, anything that basically leaves your child out of breath. So for the toddlers in the study, aged 1 to 2 years old, they spent about 72% of their time in sedentary behavior, which is about 8 hours. And this is all time where the monitor was worn and the child was awake. They spent an average of 16% of their day, or 1.8 hours, in light physical activity, and 12% of their day, or about 1.4 hours, in moderate to vigorous physical activity, so that high intensity activity. For the preschoolers in the study, so children aged 3 to 5, about 61% of their day, or just under 7 hours, was spent in sedentary behavior. 24%, or 2.6 hours, was spent in light physical activity, and 15% of their day, or 1.6 hours of their day, was spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity. So now the question was, are children in the Guelph Family Health Study meeting the current guidelines? So again, the toddlers in the study were recommended to get at least 3 hours of physical activity of any type per day, and about 63% of the children in the study met those guidelines. For the preschoolers in the study, about 95% of them are meeting the current guidelines of 3 hours of physical activity per day with at least 1 hour of energetic play. So how does this compare to other children in Canada? Research shows that about 99% of toddlers are meeting the current guidelines. This decreases slightly in preschoolers, so 3 to 4 year olds. For 3 to 4 year olds, about 62% of them are meeting the guidelines. And then unfortunately, as children get older, only about 36% of youth between the ages of 5 and 17 are meeting the current guidelines. So this shows why it's important to establish really good physical activity habits while the children are young, so that they continue to be as active as they grow older. And to provide some tips on how to do that, I'm going to turn things over to Jake.
Thanks, Becky. Hello, everyone. My name is Jake, as Becky mentioned, and my role with the Guelph Family Health Study involves knowledge translation surrounding movement behaviors. Naturally, this means that I frequently work with the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines. But when I started trying to find the information, I realized that the guidelines were not presented in the clearest way. As you can see here, this page is full of text that is very small, which makes it challenging to read. Additionally, it contains some scientific jargon that was not explained in much depth, and a perfect example of this is energetic play, which Becky talked about earlier. And finally, the additional information to help make this resource more clear is challenging to find. This led me to the idea of making a resource that presented these guidelines in a more clear and understandable way. Specifically, I tried to provide clarity surrounding any topics that may be confusing, such as different intensities of physical activity, provided links and QR codes where possible to additional information, and made it easier to read. My last goal was to present the information in a kid-friendly way so that parents could use this resource with their children. Beyond presenting the guidelines, I also wanted to help families to continue to reach the recommended physical activity. With the help of feedback from the Parent Council, which thank you very much again for, I made some resources like the one you can see on your screen here. The purpose of this resource is to provide some ideas for indoor activities that are screen-free and will break up sedentary behavior. This is especially important right now, as the COVID-19 pandemic has presented a significant barrier for staying active. This was evident in the results of a Guelph Family Health Study survey, as physical activity had decreased in 52% of children during the pandemic. Given this challenge, I thought I would give some quick tips for reaching the physical activity guidelines despite the pandemic. The first is to make physical activity fun. It shouldn't feel like a chore for kids. The second is to do activities of different intensities. This is important as there are recommendations about different intensities, but also so that children have enough energy to do a variety of physical activity throughout the day. The next tip is to do physical activity as a family, which will be good for all family members. And lastly, make sure to switch up physical activities so that children remain engaged and also practice different movements for their motor development. And if you're looking for some ideas for different physical activities to do with your children, you can visit the resources tab on the Guelph Family Health Study website. This is where my movement guideline resource will be posted in the next week or so make sure you check back in then. I want to thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass it back over to Jess.
Yay, we're so lucky to have you two thinking about movement. And Jake, thank you so much for all your work to make it so much easier for families to interpret. Just today, I learned 2 things I didn't know. So thank you so much.